Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Lecture 11. We're heading on the downward straight to our final tutorials and lectures, and we've got our amazing school visits coming up. So this lecture is looking at a build on from what we started talking about in the tutorial when we were listing off the different specialists and why we would send them. And what we're going to do in this lecture is have a little discussion around the idea of when we intervene and what are some things to look for. So early intervention, it's the way that we highlight things that are potentially going to be issues for children later in life. And what we know is that if we can help and intervene early, it means that we're resetting those patterns so that then we're going to have the best chance of success for every individual that we are working with. It's far more appropriate to intervene at a 3 or 4 year old level than it is trying to intervene at a 10, 11 or 15-year-old level. We know the research tells us that it actually has an incrementally far greater impact on their development. And it means that they're able to succeed and achieve and reach the goals that they need to. So as an early childhood educator, we have that key role to play. So often we are going to be the first professional that has noticed development that is not meeting the standard needs and expectations of a child at that particular age or development level. So we're going to be the ones that notice that atypical development. So you potentially are the person that spends more time with that child than any other professional, and sometimes in reality than their parents. So if you have a child who is in long day care, that child may be with you 5 days a week for all of your shift. So if you're on early shift, you'll be with that child from 6:30 in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so that is a very long period of time. Or if you're on the later shift, you might be with them from about 10 o'clock till 6 o'clock in the evening. That's a really long time, and you're also seeing them interact with children of exactly the same age and development level, so you're going to notice when things are not quite meeting the demands that you expect. So that's why we need to be the eyes and the ears to assist with the parents as well and the primary caregivers. You're going to have those conversations with parents more than other teachers because in the early years, we actually get to see the parents a lot more because quite often mum is only working part-time or dad's only working part-time and they're sharing the caregiving and so on. Oftentimes in a childcare centre, of course, the parents are dropping them off, so you will get to see them more. By the time the children are in year 3 or 4, you're rarely seeing parents. And if dad goes back and he's full-time working and mum is the person who's dropping off, she might only be dropping off 1 or 2 times a week and they might be in before and after school care. So it's that opportunity that we have in the early years to actually have those authentic discussions with parents. Some things for us to consider. We are teachers. We are not pediatricians. We are not psychologists. We are not social workers. We are not speech therapists. We don't label and say, I think your child has autism, because that is extraordinarily stressful. You can say your child is demonstrating certain behaviours that we're a little bit concerned about. They're repetitive, they're all these sorts of things. You don't need to attach a label to it, but you need to give it specifics so that when they do go and see the developmental pediatrician, the speech therapist, they actually have authentic details to give you. You are more than able to ask the parent to give your details to those other professionals and to give permission for you to speak to them. So that way you can have those authentic discussions with another professional, which oftentimes will happen as well. So what's important is that we don't label because we do not have those qualifications. So we only advise on the teaching and learning and we highlight where we're seeing that atypical development. If necessary, always seek a second opinion, another teacher, someone in your leadership team, someone in another room at your childcare centre and so on. And don't just launch into things with parents. As somebody who has been through this as a parent, And even with all of my education and all of my knowledge and everything that was going on, when I went to professionals and they said the words out loud to me, it was still horrendous, heartbreaking, and I experienced anger about it all. So you do not want to be on the receiving end of that. You want to make sure that you're saying the right things to connect with the parents and maintain good relationships. So indicators for referral. Remember that we often need to go into our ASEQA developmental checklist and have a look at what's expected and the things that are out of the range. So when to seek appropriate directions. So let's think about if we want to seek referrals for an occupational therapist. When a child has poor motor skills, they can't coordinate very well, they're having great difficulties coordinating to do their handwriting in some way, they can't hold a pencil correctly and do their drawing, or their speech development doesn't match what they're drawing. So you've got a year 2 child or a year 1 child even who's not drawing proper faces and so on, yet they're quite articulate, they don't have any other global delays and so on. So look at why they can't do those things. Mixed dominance, meaning that by year 1, most children have chosen a dominant hand. They will generally always pick up a pen or a pencil or a texter or a crayon or a paintbrush, always with the one hand. When children are still swapping at year 1 and year 2, that's a bit of an issue. They're still going to be swapping at 3 and 4 and 5, but generally by around 5, they've started to establish some type of dominance with it. Their inability to cross their midline. This is a really interesting one, and it sounds so silly, but when you see a child who can't do it, you go, oh my goodness. So if you hand a toy to a child directly in front of their face or in front of their chest, and then you ask them to grab it with one hand, they'll be able to do that with either hand. Hand it slightly over to the left, but ask them to grab it with their right hand. And can they coordinate to get their hand across their body to grab the thing? Whereas other times they'll only be able to grab it with the hand that it's directly in front of. So I know it sounds so silly and like, well, of course every child can do that. Well, actually, no, I have had a child who couldn't do that, and he would not be able to move and do where you put your arms and you just wave your arms in front of your body. He had troubles doing that. It was like he would reach an invisible wall in the middle of his body. So that's one thing to make sure that you refer them on to an OT. So when they have poor visual perception, so if you're noticing that they are tripping or they're walking into things or they're dropping things or they reach for something but they can't quite get it. So it's that idea of the linking between what they see and the way they're reaching for it. So they're possibly not understanding how much they have to stretch their arms and so on. If they're having difficulties with activities of daily living, and what that means is things like getting dressed, putting their shoes on, taking their shoes off, taking their jumper off, actually coordinating to pull their socks off by themselves, moving the Velcro to where it needs to be, any of those sorts of things, using a spoon, manipulating the yogurt tube to actually get it into their mouths, not all over their faces and all over their shirt, and so on. So that general idea of poor motor planning, often we have a disorder called dyspraxia, which is basically the linkage between their brain and their muscles is not quite working and firing on everything that it needs to. So their brain will tell them to coordinate their body, but their body just doesn't quite get there in the right way. So oftentimes poor motor planning is an indicator. So you'll see them pause as they try and organize their body and their brain to do the same thing. And that general level of uncoordination beyond standard toddler time. And tactile discrimination, meaning that they are not able to touch certain things and that they can't tell you that that's fluffy and that's rough. So you'll often see sensory tables with lots of different things for children to touch, and some children who have that tactile discrimination inability, they won't be able to tell you the differences between different things. I love putting out tubs that have different ones that the kids can put their feet in and so on. Some children hate it. It's quite interesting to see. So if we're looking at handwriting, we've got things like getting the kids to sit correctly, and there's all these little rhymes that go through with that, helping them to put their paper somewhere still. So there's different clipboards you can get. There's lots of different things. There's a slope board that puts it at a different angle so it provides less pressure on their shoulder and their elbow. Using Peggy Lego. So if you Google Peggy Lego, you'll be able to find the cute little rhymes that go with it. Using cat lines or coloured lines like you can see on the right hand side picture so the children can trace things. Having lots of pre-printing patterns. So we need to think about the way that we write in the English language is we organise things from the top to the bottom and from the left to the right, and more often it's in an anti-clockwise direction when we're forming letters like our D's, our A's, our even our E's. Lots of our letters have an anti-clockwise direction to them. Have lots of reference charts on your desk and your walls so the children have the environmental print around them, and put the little charts with the little arrows of where they stop and they start and so on, so that way they can see things. So when you have a look, you want to do these types of patterns. So can you see using the spirals, they go round and round in an anti-clockwise direction. So then you've got more spirals being formed. You're getting them to make little shapes that make a pattern. And then we've got our left to our right and our top, up, top, up, top, up. And so that way they're repeating the same types of patterns. So oftentimes you'll find that lots of classrooms will use these types of things. Don't always have them as tracing, sometimes have them as free form as well. So that way the children are encouraged to work out how to form nice, neat lines and how to have control over their hand holding and the movement of their bodies. So different strategies that you can use. Think about ways that you can develop their hand strength, their finger isolation and their pencil grip. So doing the chopsticks, having little tweezers that they can move things around, getting them to do lots of different motions at different tables that you have. They can be indoor tables and outdoor tables. If you Google and have a look at activities to develop pencil grip, you'll be able to find a whole range of them, and they become play-based things that you can just build into whatever you have. You can build your little mini worlds, and then they can move things around. I used to always have different things for my kindy kids where I would have these chopsticks that were joined on the top. They had little characters and so on them, and we had different coloured pom-poms, and they had sorting activities, and they could put the pom-poms into the little containers, and then I would have the little tiny macaroni, and sometimes we'd even go down to rice, and we would have it as little challenges and so on, and see how many you could do, and I'd put a little timer on the table. But it's all about developing that strength so that then when you do start to get them to do a little bit more handwriting or a little bit more of the movement that requires them to hold a pencil, that way they feel comfortable. And you'll see some children feel really uncomfortable with it, so you need to give them lots of opportunities. Lots of Play-Doh. Play-Doh is one of our learning centres that should be out every single centre when you're working with anyone from 3-year-olds to 6-year-olds. When you move into pre-primary, I often see that Play-Doh's not on the table, whereas it should be on the table in pre-primary still. It's helping them to develop all of their strength in their hands. So lots of things with Play-Doh. Make your Play-Doh with them each week. Get them to roll it. Have different things on the Play-Doh table to match to whatever the inquiry or the provocations are that you're setting up. Your pegs and your tweezers. Kids love doing pegging things. They just love pegs. They stick them all over themselves and so on. We have ones where they have to see how many pegs they can put on the dolly and all those sorts of fun activities and so on. I always had lacing and threading activities, and the threading activities could be gigantic ones with shoelaces, but then I also had threading activities with much thinner things as well, and we had plastic needles they could use. We had shoelaces that went in and out of laminated cards. We had lots and lots of different sorts of threading activities. Kids love them. We've got spinning tops. You can buy spinning tops. I also made spinning tops out of Lego and different things that we had around the room, and we looked at what would make things spin and what stopped things spinning and so on. So lots of different activities. Lego and blocks. So think with your 3-year-olds, you'd be working with your Duplo. By the time you get to your pre-primaries, you might start to introduce standard Lego. And then in year 1 and 2, I would usually have Lego blocks as well. And so my Duplo was whole hand grip to move those and take them apart. When you get to Lego, that is normal Lego. Yes, it inflicts major pain on your feet, but most of the time you got shoes on. And then pulling them off is more your pincher grip when you're doing that one. And then you've got your little finger rhymes, Driver Man and Peter Pointer and so on, and all your different maze activities. So you'll be able to find lots of these sheets online, and there's colouring in books that I would photocopy and things like that had different mazes. So it's getting the children to follow a path, but not always just having it with something that's just a photocopied sheet. So laminated ones, having different activities. You can find ones that are online and on apps as well. So ways to improve dominance and midline issues. Some of the things that you can do, we've got cutting activities. Now there's lots of different scissors that are available for children with different movement inabilities and abilities. So there's scissors that are joined with the 2 parts that you would normally open and close. So they have a nice big bendy part that helps them to bring it back together again really easily and gives them lots of support for it. I do lots and lots of cooking. I used to do cooking every single week. Mixing, think about mixing with a bowl and a big spoon, how much that gets the kids' arms moving and so on. Think about using potato peelers, and we would peel potatoes, we would peel apples, and then we'd put them through and make curly whirly apples, and we'd bake them, we'd do different things with them. But it's all those different activities that encourage that movement in the arm. So you don't always want to just have tracing activities from something. Give them lots of different activities to develop those emotions. Think about your bat and ball activities. So your hand-eye coordination, some children are really good at it. Some children need lots of practice. Some don't have lots of practice at home. So give them lots of activities in the classroom. Simple bat and ball activities you can set up outside. You can also have little ones inside. We use like table tennis bats and little round balls, and we would sit in a circle and we would have the little table tennis bats and we'd bat the ball back to each other, but not high, we would roll it back to each other. And so even just rolling, get the children to sit with legs apart and roll the ball backwards to one another, especially when you're working with 3-year-olds and so on. So that way they're practicing moving their shoulders and their elbows and their wrists and controlling and getting that movement happening in a different way. Paper weaving, oh my goodness, this is hilarious. It's so easy. Again, laminate something, put lots of cuts in it, get the children to weave the paper in and out. They love it. I know they all sound so simple, but they're so great for the kids. And getting the children to do lots of figure eights, so that movement of left to right, up and down and around. It's very important for them. Now, when to think about seeing an optometrist. So if they have any visual motor difficulties, so that idea of being able to see and recognize shapes, letters, sounds, colors, any of those sorts of things. When their hand-eye coordination is unexpectedly not working the way that you anticipate. When their visual memory, so you're showing them something, but obviously they're not seeing enough of it to commit it to memory in some way. And one thing that I always try and keep an eye out is their peripheral vision. So if you walk up behind a child and you come to their side, just try and see, if you're a bit worried about them, children should be able to see off to the side a little bit. They should be able to see if you're waving at them and so on. Children shouldn't only see you when you're standing directly in front of them. So you want to make sure that they can see you off to the side a little bit. Now, when to go and see a developmental psychologist. So this is someone that is specializing in small children. So we talked in our tutorial about our standard psychologists. Developmental psych is a good check on all development. Sometimes it might be the first professional that they see, and then they might refer them on to other specialists. So particularly if you've got children having any behaviour issues, you're a bit worried that they've got oppositional defiance disorder, any major friend and social issues, and they do a lot of work with social stories and explicit teaching of the skill. So some children, depending on their home experiences, depending on if you're concerned that they might have autism, that we are looking at those social skills and how core they are to being a functioning member of society. So we want to make sure in our classroom that we are always teaching social skills just all the time. So things like somebody gets to be first in line, somebody gets to be first to have a turn, but then other people have to wait their turn. So not everyone can go first. When we're waiting, everybody else sits quietly and waits for the other children to have their turn. So talking them through things like this explicit teaching of these social skills is really important, because some children have great difficulties with this idea. So we've got to give them lots of opportunities to be able to do it in a nice, safe environment, and not always with children, but to practice first, and then they can reinforce it with their peers. And things like the explicit teaching and having posters up around the room. So what does listening look like and feel like? So we face the other person. We look at the other person. We keep still so we're not constantly fidgeting and moving around. We use listening words like, oh, okay, tell me more. And we look interested. Now, if you've had any children who have autism in your class, those particular 5 things are not what they do. They do not look at the other person. They will look down. They will be fidgeting. They will be moving. They will be rolling. They will not be looking interested, and they will not be using any listening words. But if you're having your neurodivergent children with your neurotypical children interacting in a group, the neurotypical child will be feeling quite upset that the neurodivergent child is not giving them the signals that they're anticipating. So the neurodivergent child needs to learn some different things to help the other people comfortable, and the neurotypical child needs to understand there's a bit of give and take required as well. So speech therapist is often the one that I would end up referring children through the first, through to the most, and often as the first port of call. So it would be, when I would have them in kindy, it would be their articulation of sounds. So there would be some children that I would not understand at all. I would have great difficulty understanding most of their sounds. So I would need to have a chat to the parents and suggest that they go and see a speech therapist. Sometimes I was worried about a lot of other things, but a speech therapist was a really non-confrontational first step, because if they said to their friends and family, my son's teacher is a bit worried about his speech, nobody would be condescending. Nobody thinks about it poorly. Whereas if they say, my son's teacher's a bit worried about his interactions with others and they want me to go and see a psychologist, certain cultures will see that as a real negative, whereas speech therapy is not. So speech therapy can be something that you can get them to first, and then speech therapists will be able to help you and work with you as well to help the parents understand there might be something else going on as well. So speech therapists work on language, the vocab, the rules of the way that you form words, and the semantics of when you put words together, and so on. So they look at it through 3 main ways. They want to talk about reading. So they're encouraging, they're predicting the question skills and so on. They do lots of talking with describing language, introducing new words. They encourage them to use their words, express their feelings and so on. And they do lots and lots of play. So they often will use things like our social stories we've used before. They'll teach them how to imitate others. They'll explore lots of other situations and so on. The other thing they look at is this idea of auditory processing, which is when you will speak to a child and then you can literally see the cogs turning, and sometimes they don't turn in the right directions or they just stop. So that's the child's comprehension of the spoken word. And sometimes children have auditory processing issues where they'll hear it, but they won't be able to follow it through. They won't be able to comprehend it. They won't be able to process that. So they'll need some therapy to work on that. And then you've got the obvious ones like fluency and stuttering. Stuttering is one that is really interesting in that a lot of parents think children grow out of it. Stuttering does not become something they grow out of. You must get parents to see a speech therapist straight away if you hear sounds of stuttering. Stuttering becomes a massive issue, and research used to say, like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they would grow out of it. What they know now is that it actually becomes worse. It becomes a target for bullies. It breaks down child self-esteem. The sooner we can get stuttering under control, the easier it will be. So resources to help you. So remember that we have our checklists and that they will be able to give you guidelines as to what the common errors will be and then how you can help the children if need be. So when we're thinking about early intervention, we want to make sure that we are not labeling children. We want to make sure that we are providing them with assistance in class and that we're having good open conversations with parents, but we're not giving parents too much information that we're going to stress them out. We refer them on to the people that we think they need to, but without associating labels with them. So I want you to think about children that you've worked with over your prac or children that you might be nannying or having in your childcare centre. Write down any questions that you want to have as our discussion for our final tutorial, and we've got our school visits for the next 2 weeks. So I will see you at the schools on the Tuesday and the Thursday. Tuesday people at Our Lady of Mount Carmel, Thursday people at St. Pat's. Have a wonderful week and I will see you on Tuesday, everyone, or Thursday at the school.